Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a couple minutes. And Brian, do you want to go ahead and do you want to pull up and tease the poll question? People could actually start
Sure.
start
That's a good
answering
idea.
that as people come in.
Great idea.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. If this is your first time on a EV Insider Live, what we always like to do, instead of leaving dead air or something for those first couple of minutes while we wait for everybody to join, we like to put it to good use with a poll question. And so I'll go over this again. But if you've already joined us, go ahead and answer our poll question, which is, which of the following responses received the most votes in our 2023 predictions poll survey, which we're going to go over a bit later in today's webcast. Battery mineral and cell shortages, EV charging infrastructure and build out or poor charging experience, rising EV prices and challenge economy, or other.
And just to mention, to enter your answer, go ahead and you can use the chat function. I think you want to run through that one more time, Loren.
Yeah, I was giving it just a little bit, waiting for a few more people to join here. I see somebody actually has added their what
There you go.
what they think the response is range there. But hello again, everyone. If this is your first time on EV Insider Live, we'd like to start off with a poll question while we give a chance for 80% of the people who are going to join here in the first few minutes. And so we put up this poll question, which of the following responses received the most votes in our 2023 predictions poll survey. We'll actually share the results of this later on in today's webcast, but we wanted to see what all of you thought was the top vote getter. Say that again, Brian. Battery, mineral, and cell shortages, EV charging infrastructure build out, or rising combination of the rising prices in EVs and a challenging economy, or was it the write-in votes, other? So.
Just to give it a little background, this poll question was posted on LinkedIn, and they only allow for 4 answers. So that's why it's a little bit restricted right now. But I like that we're getting quite a few people writing in answers for D.
Yep. Interesting. We got somebody wrote in lithium, so the lithium shortage under A and stuff, and and we also had and we'll go over this all a bit later in the webcast, but a full-on sort of survey that had the same question, just with sort of more responses, little nuances, and we ended up sort of consolidating those answers across this. So. Brian, what do you think? Should we kick this off, our final webcast of 2022?
Yeah. All right, let's do it.
All right, and again, everyone, thanks for providing your chat answers. We'll actually go over the actual survey and poll results a little bit later.
All right. So just a few kind of housekeeping bits here. All attendees are in the mute mode, but please, at any time, if you've got questions, you can use the chat function. I will be glancing over it more towards the end of our discussion, since it's just Loren and I today, but we like your input. And then all attendees and registrants will receive this slide deck, and there will also be a recording. And I believe this time a little bit different. It will be out on YouTube, and you don't need to register or anything like that. Anybody will be able to access it. So let me first introduce myself. I'm co-host with Loren McDonald. I work at Indium Corporation, and we happen to be what's called a Tier N supplier, which means we're way up the food chain. In terms of how these vehicles and chargers and everything else in this space are built. But we are a material supplier and very intimately involved in this industry. Loren?
Hey everyone, Loren McDonald, CEO of EVAdoption. We're an EV and EV charging analyst and consulting firm, really focused on helping companies understand both the opportunities and the challenges that are presented by the transition to EVs and therefore EV charging, and sort of really just focused on data-driven, decisions.
All right.
And
So just go ahead, Loren, please.
Yeah. So today's agenda, we're gonna do. I think we changed the order here. I think it's gonna be the tweet of the month first, then a statistic, and then we're gonna go through some of our. Brian spent a lot of time in the editing machine, and he pulled out some short clips from our episodes earlier this year, and we're going to sort of riff on some of our thoughts about those and why those were chosen and important. And then what you're all waiting for, we're excited about, is just kind of going through some of the predictions that some of our guests and other people had, and as well as our own predictions, and then we'll get to your questions and close it out. All right. So if you're new to EV Insider Live, we have sort of beyond our sort of discussion and normally our guests, we like to do sort of two fun things, which is usually a tweet of the month, sometimes LinkedIn, but a tweet of the month and then a statistic. And so I chose this one. Just there's a lot. We could spend a whole webcast just on this tweet, but there's a couple of things to unpack in this one from Biden talking about building out the charging networks and the $5 billion NEVI funding and the $2.5 billion sort of discretionary funding, but I wanted to make sort of a couple points. One is just one of the continuing problems we have in this industry of terminology and language. And Biden, like many people, uses the wrong term. He says 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Well, charging station is what many of us are trying to do, is get everybody to agree that charging station is actually similar to the term gas station, meaning it's the site, it's the location. So station means the place where you go and charge. And then, the industry is kind of wonky, and we use terms like port and pedestal and connectors and all these other different things. I like to just call it a charger, but most people use the term port or something similar to that. But we are not going to, the funding is not going to build out 500,000 charging stations, because that would be like 2 million chargers if you did an average of four a piece, right? And so one of the ongoing challenges in industry is you never know what people are actually talking about, because terms have different meanings, and we haven't agreed on that. The second part of it obviously is Elon Musk sort of joining in and sort of doing a little twist there of in the belly of Biden about if you just use Tesla. And there's two things there. One is that it's pretty widely acknowledged that Tesla does have the best charging experience. As a two-time Tesla owner, I can attest to that. And it is the largest fast charging network from a numbers perspective. Some of the other from the actual number of chargers and connectors, some of the other networks actually have more locations. And then I'll move on, Brian. But the reality is, the essence of this is not only do we need more chargers and more locations to charge, but a theme of today's webcast is going to be around just sort of the poor quality experience and everything that goes into that. The statistics of the month kind of I chose is a bit related in that there are a lot of different opinions about how many actually chargers and locations we actually need to support the number of EVs. But one of my, Brian, just the things that drives me crazy is almost every day I read an article, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, or your local paper, or whatever it is, people make this comparison to the number of, charging stations to gas stations.
Right.
And like I said at the beginning, I'm all about the data and math. And the reality is, we actually have a better ratio, and I don't like the ratio concept, but if you use it, we actually have a better ratio of EV chargers to EVs right now. In other words, there's about 200 gas-powered vehicles to every gas nozzle. So if you pull into a gas station, go up to a pump and grab that nozzle, there's literally about 200 gas cars to every one of those. On the EV side, there's about 26 EVs per every sort of port to that connector. So we actually have sort of a better ratio, but that sort of gets lost. And if you add in the number of chargers that we have at home, right, then it's actually, by my math, about 1.6, because not everybody, has a charger at home, or they live in an apartment and stuff like that. The point is not that we have enough chargers. We clearly don't. But that what people always leave out in this comparison is they leave out the fact that we only have about 3.2 million EVs on the road, whereas we have nearly 300 million cars. So we have to compare apples to apples.
What's the problem? We can just stop our discussion right now, right?
Yeah, no. So the point of these last two slides is we have sort of terminology issues, and we have sort of the data numbers issues, and we're not comparing things correctly.
Right. So let's get to some polling questions. Not yours, but these were the ones that went out both to LinkedIn as well as a more detailed mailing with more questions. We received about 50 response in LinkedIn and about 5 times that with our mailing. And it's very clear. It's what we were just talking about. Yep. EV charging infrastructure is top of mind, and a very close second is supply chain. And that kind of resonates with some of the answers that you guys just gave.
Yeah, and just what I did with the chart there is as mentioned earlier, the survey actually had 8 responses, and the LinkedIn had basically 3 plus. So what I did is sort of combine those, but I bet if we actually asked the same exact number of responses, it would have been even closer. But as Brian said, as you can see, that clearly sort of leaders, the top vote in getting was the charging experience and battery and supply chain issues. And
right.
Yep.
So we are now going into the next part of our agenda, and we're going to see a few clips from prior guests. And if you have any issues, you might want to just turn up your audio a bit. But I'm going to go ahead and play this, and then we'll have our comments.
There's shockingly little data about the reliability, uptime, utilization, etc. of public charging. But the model thus far has never incentivized or required any of the public networks to focus on the user. They're typically focused on, what do I have to do to get a grant? What are the requirements there? Minimum speed and those sorts of things. And I'll say historically that the public programs, whether it's state, federal, ratepayer, taxpayer, whatever, but if you think about stuff that is.
So, shockingly little data. That's a great statement from Chelsea. And I don't know if everybody knows who she is. She's a bit of a rock star in this industry. Chelsea was involved with the EV1, which is the predecessor. You can say the granddaddy of Tesla. And there was even a movie, you can find it on Netflix. And she's kind of the star of the show. So she's been in this a long time. And she's saying basically, even the period that we've been doing this, we still don't have data. And if you don't have data, you're not going to be able to measure something very well. We're in our next clip with Cory Bullis of FLO. We're going to get into a little bit more about what this all means in terms of uptime. But one of the points I want to make, and this is a good segue, Loren, is what we're finding or what we're hearing is a lot of these charging stations aren't even being measured. All they know as the operator of these systems knows, is it on or off? So if there's a problem with output on a screen, let's say the screen doesn't work, you can't begin your charging session, but it is on nonetheless. And the operator, all they're seeing as far as their visibility is, oh, well, it's working. And they literally have to wait for someone to call to know that there's a problem. And to your point, Loren, about stations, most chargers are not in stations, charging stations. They're in a back lot behind Safeway or, Macy's or something like that, or in the middle of a parking lot. So there's nobody even taking a look at it.
Yeah, and a couple things on that, Brian, is that, right now, the federal government and many of the states are sort of working with the industry to actually define what uptime is, what goes into it. And, it's looking like 97% uptime is sort of the easy decision point that everybody's agreeing on. What everybody's sort of arm wrestling about is what actually is included in that definition. And so, the industry is lobbying for not including vandalism and not including broken connectors and different things like that. And ultimately, what's being left out of this is it's a very wonky, technical, industry-centric metric that's going to allow them to hit that number to keep the funding, but it's still a very poor customer experience. When I go to charge, I don't care why I can't get a charge. If the power's off, if the connector's broken, the only thing I care about is that I can't charge. And so we really need to think more broadly. And that's a big part of what Chelsea was talking about, is we're just not focused on the customer, focused too much on sort of the technology in the industry. And right now, as you mentioned, it's been all about just getting the funding and getting these things in the ground, and nobody's worried about actually keeping them maintained and creating that stellar customer experience.
Well, I love using this example and to share this with the listeners, and I bet you everyone would agree that this statement. When was the last time you were at a gas station and you swiped your credit card and it didn't work and it said, go inside and see the attendant? What do? Do you go inside? I don't. I get back in my car and I drive off. It's like, I don't want to go into this sketchy gas station, where they're selling the lotto cards behind a plexiglass with, bulletproof. No, thanks. I'm going to move on. So, yeah. And gas stations fare far, far better in terms of uptime performance than charging pedestals or stations, if you want to call them that as well. So let's go to the next one. This is Cory Bullis of FLO. If you're not familiar with FLO, they're a Canadian-based manufacturer of level 2 and level 3 charging. I think they might even have level 1. So that's your home. That's kind of the smaller systems you see out in front of Cisco, and then not Cisco, Costco, and then level 3s would be those super DC fast chargers.
Let me first start by saying there's really, I would say, 3 categories of components, if I can call it that feed into uptime: hardware, software, and then the actual communication between the elements, from the charger to the vehicle, the charger to the cloud, the charger to the payment system. You're having tons of interactions through communication. There's certainly a myriad of issues that can bring a charger down. On the hardware side, you got to recognize that a lot of these chargers are weatherized. They're out in the elements. They're facing harsh winters, hot summers. That provides a lot of work.
Yeah, and so, one of the things, Brian, that he's talking about here in sort of the communications is that there's sort of multiple moving parts, right? There's the hardware, there's the software, there's connecting up to, the cell towers. Most of these chargers out there are actually using cellular connections to actually connect up to the, in essence, the cloud, the internet, to be able to do the authentication and things like that. And that goes back into that sort of the uptime issue. Like there's been a lot of horror stories on social media about people going to charge at one of the major charging networks, and one of the major AT&T or somebody like that is down, and so you literally can't charge because the underlying capability of these charging networks relies on being connected up to the internet and stuff. And so You know, the other thing, I was at an EV charging seminar yesterday, and we were talking about some of the underlying technology standards, not to get wonky, but the open charge protocol, OCPP, you know, basically um, is not yet a standard, right? It's sort of something that everybody uses, but they have maybe their own sort of flavor of it yet. And so we just, you know, we're so early, Brian, a lot of this stuff that, you know, standards and getting everybody to agree upon it. I mean, we talk a lot about, you know, CCS, the connector versus Tesla. And, you know, we still have that issue and difference. And so I think ultimately what this all gets to is, you know, we're still several years away from getting everybody on the same page, you know, like what we have with the internet, right? Like where it's just, yeah, everybody gets on and it works, right? Most of the time, right? And we have to get there with this technology.
Well, communications and standards is you know, clearly an issue. And when you do go to these sessions, and I've been to many of these sort of infrastructure conferences, that's what people like to focus on. What they don't focus on, which I never hear in discussion, is the hardware. And we saw in the recent Berkeley study this year that the number one failure point, and these were DC fast chargers in California. They went out and surveyed a little over 600 systems, and they found out that roughly a quarter of them were not working. And the number one contribution was there was a hardware issue related to the electronics.
Yep. Speaking of which, Brian, I know that's sort of what you're, you know, you're really sort of focused on. I think didn't you write a paper recently about this sort of hardware reliability issue?
Yeah, exactly. And matter of fact, I got Cory's input on it. And what's really interesting is, to my earlier point, the failure mechanism is not well or clearly known at the time because they just frankly can't monitor it. But what they're finding out is that it's a myriad of issues. And frankly, what is at the core as you start to dig into this is a lot of the electronics that go into these systems are built to the same standard as let's say your laptop. A good analogy I like to use is microwave ovens. You know, you're building this to a microwave oven standard when really it should be to an automotive standard. 97, 98% uptime is more like automotive. 98, 90, you don't need 97, 98% uptime on your microwave oven.
Yep.
So we'll take us to the next clip.
Let me first start by saying there's really.
We're not going to do him. We're not going to do Cory again. Okay, here we go. Did you want to say something else, Loren?
I was just going to say, while you're setting that up, somebody mentioned that the volume on the clips was not as loud as us, and yeah, we actually checked that before, and we've got the volume up as high as we can. So apologize if you could just maybe try to listen closely.
Maybe turn it up a little higher, or it's a technological limitation. All right. Okay, I'm sorry. So Kevin Hernandez is with ScottMadden, and they're a consultancy organization, and they focus on the grid. So they're working with all the different utility providers, and here in the United States, we have 3,000 of them having to go through this evolution that basically the way we deliver power and how we handle power hasn't changed in over 100 years, and EV just turns that on its ear.
Option and EV regulation, you know, we can see a really wide spectrum, right? In some states that are very progressive, we've seen a lot of progressive regulation in California, some pretty progressive regulation in New York State. But there's other states where, both because of, for a variety of factors, there's maybe very little impetus to move forward and to drive EV adoption among customers in those states. So what we're seeing is, you know, this uneven adoption, this uneven regulatory policy. The good news is, in those forward-leaning states, I mean, you're starting to see things, and whether they work or not is kind of indifferent, but they form a roadmap, you know, for those other states to follow.
Yeah, and Brian, it was a really good point, and also Cory at FLO sort of made some similar points, and you know, as a you know, public affairs guy, he basically is dealing with not just 50 states regulations, right, that Kevin was also referring to, but there's literally hundreds. Every local jurisdiction might have different electrical code requirements. How many, if you're an apartment owner, right, how many spaces you have to add, and with, handicap access, and how many chargers you have to add. And so if you're in the industry and you're a charging network or a company trying to build this out, it's literally mind-numbing that you can't just approach this in sort of one way. You're going to have to approach it, and the type of people you can use. Some areas are going to require union electricians. Other areas won't, and stuff. And so it's a very complicated maze and stuff. And so one of the small but bright hopes, Brian, is not at that sort of electrical code level, but at least at kind of a consistency level. The NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program that I think I referenced earlier, that sort of build out of the national charging network with the federal funds, does have several sort of minimum requirements, including that sort of uptime and several other factors. So I think that could be, that's starting to get everybody to talk together, that sort of federal framework, and ultimately that'll hopefully sort of trickle down to states and cities and things like that, and make it easier for the industry to, all speak the same language and have to meet sort of the same requirements.
Yeah, and one of the big takeaways from our episode with Kevin, which was an eye-opener to me, is this is no field of dreams, guys. If you know the analogy, the old baseball movie, build it, we will come. That's not how this industry, the grid, utilities work. They have to get permission. First, they have to have a plan, and then they have to get sign off. So we're kind of like in this chicken and egg, where are we going to wait for all these EVs? And there's going to be a flood of them to come that, oh, shoot, well, maybe we need to build this out. It's already kind of too late. But they don't have the option by law. It's a quasi-monopolistic industry. They can't just go out and start building stuff and putting it in the ground. All right, should we move on to the next one?
Yep, let's do the next one. People want to hear those predictions.
Okay, so Apoorv, this with the volume, he's very soft spoken. So if you need to turn your volume up now on 3, 2, 1, turn it up.
Neighborhood. Your average neighborhood is supported by a piece of infrastructure, a transformer, a feeder, whatever, that actually supports between 4 to 8 homes. Well, guess what? In America, we have 2 cars per home. And so now you're looking at a situation where every household, peaks out at about 5 kW. And now you've got each EV adding another 10 to 15 kW. And by the way, there's 2 EVs potentially one day per household. So that's a lot of load coming onto the system, onto this infrastructure that defines the capacity, the carrying capacity of the grid. And we are just not ready to upgrade all of that, because that would literally cost trillions of dollars. And so you have to be smart.
Okay, could turn down your volume. So let me, if you didn't follow that, he threw out a lot of numbers, but I think this is really, really important. So our current infrastructure, and think of a neighborhood, the transformer that supplies that neighborhood, it's only supplying to what he was saying, 4 to 8 houses, and each house has about a 5 kW output or draw today. It's your dryer, your coffee machine, that kind of thing. What he's saying is that if you had 2 EVs per home, and most people have 2 vehicles, so just hypothetically, if you had 2 EVs per home, that's like 20 to 30 kilowatt draw, in addition to what you're already drawing. So the infrastructure that you would have to put into place if you were to copy our current model would be in the trillions. So an analogy that I like to use, Loren, when you and I have heard this a lot of times, is an EV is akin to like 10 electric dryers running in your home if you're charging it. And if you think using his analogy, 6 homes consume, if you do the math, about 30 kW. If those same 6 homes each had 2 EVs, that would be 180 kW on top of its current draw. So you would have to have the capacity to provide about 6 times what we have in place today.
Yeah, and so if sticking with your washer dryer analogy, if everybody washed their clothes and dried them at the exact same time, right? You've got that sort of bigger load impact, and that's ultimately sort of really the key answer to this is people are assuming everybody's going to charge at 6 p.m., 6 to 7 p.m. or whatever, when they come home from work or that type of thing. And the reality is people charge at sort of different times, and that's really that's what companies like WeaveGrid does, what's called managed charging, or some people refer to as smart charging, is the ability to basically optimize when people charge. So if you go back to that that example of Brian, like my neighborhood or your neighborhood, there's a relatively simple solution to this, which is to basically pace out when people charge, right? And so not having everybody charge at the exact same time. And one of the things that's happened is the utilities, many of them have launched what's called time of use rates, so that it's cheaper if you charge like overnight. So I used to charge at like 12:30 because PG&E offered a lower EV rate when I would charge that. But what's going to happen going forward is because what if everybody on my neighborhood, if there was 10 EVs, if they all charged at that 12:30 time, even though there was very little use in general in the area because most people were going to be sleeping, the fact that all 10 cars would be charging at the same time in my neighborhood would have that impact on the transformer. So ultimately the answer to this is basically pacing out when people charge from solar power during the day and stuff. And so but the other thing, Brian, is that the real challenge is those transformers. There aren't any, right? We have a massive supply chain problem, and this is getting more and more attention, but things like the switchgear and the transformers can take 6 to 12 months to get. So that's going to be sort of a huge delay to sort of building this infrastructure out.
Yeah, one of the industry influencers' predictions that we're going to share in a moment addresses exactly that point. All right, so let's go on to the next one. By the way, we got a lot of chatter on this topic, and the math is a little bit confusing. What I was saying is, or Apoorv was saying, is the typical home is 5 kW, but the typical transformer is supporting anywhere from 4 to 8 homes. So I just use 6 as kind of the average to come up with that math. All right, now we have Alexa, and if you want to turn up your volume a little bit. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Younger companies don't have those established relationships with their suppliers nearly to the extent that the legacy OEMs do. So when you factor just the disruptions that are going on across the board, and the fact that they don't have that long-standing, decades-long relationship with these companies. In some cases, they're potentially having to go with companies that aren't their first choice because their first choice companies are already allocating more of their own resources to their legacy customers that they can trust, that they know will be able to pay them. That's a really tough position for a Rivian or a Lucid to be in. Their hands are kind of tied. And
all right,
yeah,
Loren, before you say anything, apologize to everyone. I didn't introduce who Apoorv is. He's with WeaveGrid, and they are a company that helps intelligently balance out how this is all going to work from a software, from an AI standpoint. And then Alexa St. John, she's a reporter. She's actually very well known in the EV space, and she breaks a lot of hot stories. She's worked for the Wall Street Journal. She's got her finger on what's going on. Go ahead, Loren.
Yeah, and she she covers a lot of the startups really closely, Lucid, Rivian, Fisker, et cetera. In fact, I was on another webinar with her yesterday talking about those companies. But the core point she's making, which is a huge one, is one of the things we talk about is the EV startups have this 100% focus on EVs. They tend to be more tech savvy. They can move faster, and so the original thought was that a lot of these companies, and certainly Tesla did, is has several advantages against the legacy automakers. But now what we're starting to see is the supply chain issues are becoming massive hurdles for these companies, because as Alexa said, and Brian talks a lot about this, is just those long-term relationships. And the suppliers care about if they're going to get paid or not, and they care about taking care of their biggest customers. They care about sort of volume, right? Any company wants to sell to companies that can provide larger volumes. So if you're some of these suppliers, are you gonna focus on selling for 150,000 EVs to GM or Ford, or 15,000 to Lucid, who you're not exactly sure, maybe they don't end up paying, right? Or they change they change something. So that's been sort of a real challenge, and we saw that with Lucid last year. I mean, they only ended up delivering a few thousand EVs when they were supposed to deliver like 15 to 20,000.
So Loren, putting this in context, and you've said this a few times, and I like it, that this is like the biggest industrial revolution that we've seen in 100 years. And I think,
no, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and we were talking to Alexa much offline in preparation for her episode, and she and I both agree. I'm looking at it from a manufacturing standpoint. She's seeing it from a different perspective, but we both agree that recalls and customer dissatisfaction is going to be a real problem in this space. And to kind of further bolster that statement, I mean, J.D. Powers just came out with this year a report here in the United States. They're seeing about 38% more problems. This is just customer feedback, not a recall, problems of a typical EV, I shouldn't say typical, a EV versus a comparable ICE or internal combustion engine. So there are more problems.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is those statistics didn't include Tesla. So this is everybody else getting a start in this space.
Yeah, Brian, what do you think's driving this sort of those quality issues and differences?
Well, it's interesting. The Tesla example, we saw a big recall, and that did not have to do with anything that I'm focused on, but a lot of what I'm seeing in my area in manufacturing is on the electronic side. If you put it into perspective, vehicles for the last 100 years have been mainly mechanical. And if you look at a typical EV, it only has about 4 to 6% the mechanical parts. So what's doing the work? It's electronics. And Matt Pullman, who's the CEO of AIAG, and AIAG, if you guys aren't familiar, is sort of the quality hand. It's a nonprofit that works on quality and auditing and so forth for a very long time in the automotive industry. And I was at a conference where he shared that 26% of all the recalls right now are due to electronics. I mean, that's staggering. Now, that's all vehicles. That's ICE, that's EV. But when you have an EV that's mostly electronics, it's logical that you're going to see more problems because you have more electronics. And I'm going to touch a little bit more on this towards the end. All right, so prediction time. We're going to have this in just kind of 3 parts. We're going to hear from, actually, you've already heard from Apoorv and Alexa, but we're also going to hear from Amy and John. These are all thought leaders in this space. And you're going to hear Loren's prediction, my prediction, and your guys' prediction. First from the survey, as well as what I'm reading in the chat. So if you want to put any predictions in the chats, fire away.
All right, so Apoorv's prediction basically is that while we're seeing, sort of the economic issues and overall auto sales are sort of declining right now because of multiple factors, everything from, again, the supply chain issues. You just can't get electronics and parts to make the vehicles, whether they're gas powered or EVs, and obviously, you know, economy and rising prices and stuff. The interesting part of this is, and in fact, Brian, at the conference I was at yesterday, somebody had a chart that showed this sort of this shift of EVs sales are actually growing while gas-powered vehicle sales are declining. So while the overall number is down, EV's share of this, you know, of this sort of near-term decline in sales is growing. So, you know, the challenge for the automakers is while ICE vehicles, you know, make up, you know, probably 95% of their sales, right? The growth engine is this future of moving to electric vehicles. And so, you know, their challenges is sort of how do they balance continuing to invest in their portfolio that's keeping the doors open, right? That's driving those you know, those big Chevy Suburbans is why you can buy a Chevy Bolt for $30,000, right? And so how they manage that. And I think that's partly why you're seeing companies like Ford divide kind of into two different organizations, right? So they can actually each focus and optimize those separate sort of businesses, if you will.
So using Ford as an example, we can't understate how important the recent incentives, we're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, there's a number of different bills that have passed, but one that I think a lot of our listeners might not be familiar with, and it's like a phone book thick bill, but in there is a $35 per kilowatt hour incentive or money on the table for any automotive manufacturer in the United States that is sourcing basically everything from the minerals to final assembly of batteries. So I did some back napkin calculations last night in preparation to this, and took a look at the F-150 Lightning. And of course, they have different models, different battery packs. But if you took the average size battery pack of 110 kilowatt hours, that's $3,850 of incentives that go directly into Ford's pocket. I mean, that's wow. And that adds up to millions, if not billions. And it's to be seen if they pass that on to the consumer, but that's money on the table. In addition to that, if you hit all the marks, and there's a lot of rules to getting this incentive, all of us as consumers, but if that battery in its totality is built to those conditions in the United States, you get $7,500 off the sticker price. So if you start adding, Loren, you want to speculate on the math, an F-150 Lightning versus a traditional F-150?
Yeah, I mean, and if you add that up, the $3,750 incentive or the full $7,500, depending on the battery requirement, but you add in a lot of the state incentives and things like that, you know, you're actually getting to, you know, probably to cost parity between the two. And the interesting thing is that, you know, the F-150 Lightning is just exploding. No battery pun intended there. In the fleet space, I mean, the fleet buyers are just starting to buy this thing like crazy, right? Because of the total cost of ownership and the predictability of mileage and range and things. So,
and I always like to say, if you're a contractor, I mean, just think about it. You got that massive frunk, which I think has 8 power outlets in it. You have a contractor.
12 or 17 total. I forget how many. It's insane the number of outlets it has.
With a bidirectional battery, and you can throw all your tools, your saws, and whatever, lock it up, and you can power them on a job site. You don't need a diesel generator if you're up in remote Colorado or something like that. It's a better vehicle, and it could be on very well conceivably could be on parity with the gas engine equivalent.
Hey, Brian, just monitoring the time here. We'll probably try to
let's keep going.
Pick it up a bit.
Pick up the pace here. So Alexa's prediction. Let you guys read over it, but I'll just paraphrase it. The party is over for startups. All that easy money, they're tightening their belts. She's seeing that there's cutbacks, some layoffs, and so forth. And she's saying we're kind of going to hit the hangover phase of all that money for the next 2 to 3 years. There's going to be continuing supply chain shortages from going through this COVID period and so forth. She also talks about how battery storage is going to impact EVs, the grid, and so forth, but it's not going to exactly hit this year, but it's coming. I do agree with Alexa on supply chain in regards to semiconductors. It is getting better. It's not perfect, but we are seeing things are easing up a bit. But I will tell you that, that's in the context of the US market. If you start thinking about other markets like China, it's getting worse. And that has to do not only with explosive demand, but the CHIPS Act, which is being very restrictive to US technology, transfer equipment, and so forth into China.
Yeah, and I mean, and we touched on this a bit earlier, but the CEO of Rivian, had I think we used the quote in one of our previous webcasts, but just and Elon Musk has said the same thing. I mean, the battery supply and the supply of the minerals and stuff is at least for the manufacturers, it's the single biggest challenge to their growth in EVs this decade. As everybody knows, it takes potentially 7 to 10 years to build up and bring to market the lithium mines and the other types of mines and stuff. So supply chain, if it's not the time word of the year or whatever it is. I think it was gaslighting was the word of the year, but I think it should have been supply chain, and actually for the next several years.
All right, I'm trying to pick up the pace, Loren.
No, agreed.
So let me paraphrase Amy's prediction from WiTricity. She's saying that consumers and businesses are going to kind of get it next year with V2G, and that's vehicle to grid. That's that bidirectional battery feeding back power from the vehicle to the grid, and how these big batteries, are going to help even stabilize, be part of the solution. And my comment would be, those large PG&Es and Con Edisons, they're out ahead of the bubble. They've got people, they got resources, but as we heard from Kevin Hernandez, with those 3,000 utilities, it is an uneven pace rollout. Some are going to get it, some aren't. Some are going to be ahead, some are going to be behind, but I think there is a sweet spot with school buses, Loren.
Yeah. I was just going to make a couple points. So I'm not as bullish as Amy. I do think, to your point, I think school buses, we're already seeing a lot of traction because they sit there. They basically go out a couple of times a day and then sit there most of the time. And so school buses is sort of there's a lot of pilot programs around the country where they're basically feeding that power back to the grid, during the day when they're just sitting there and not driving kids around. But I think we're still probably a decade away from sort of consumer level adoption of vehicle grid. There's just too many sort of moving parts, especially the utilities, and that's why I'm more bullish on what we call vehicle to home. So removing the utility from the picture, and basically it's just you, your EV, and your house, being able to back up your house when there's a power outage and stuff. And so I think that's actually, Brian, going to be one of the big stories in 2023, is that as we're seeing more of these regional blackouts and power outages from storms and different things like that the light bulb is going to go on for a lot of people, that EV with a 80, 100, 120 kilowatt hour battery sitting in their garage, it is actually,
I can use that.
I could actually use that. The challenge, and then we should move on, Brian, is that, and I did this math, it can cost about $8,000 to $12,000 in cost for all the equipment, electricians, et cetera, to turn your Ford F-150 Lightning into the ability to back up your house for those couple of days. So we're also years away from that being affordable, but the potential is huge.
Yep. Okay. Do you want to?
Yeah, just on
John.
Yeah, John, who heads up Autel, which is a European-based EV charging hardware company that's coming.
Actually Chinese.
Oh, is it? Actually,
Yes.
I didn't realize that. Okay, thank you for that, Brian. But anyway, they're coming to the U.S. like everybody is in a big way. Want to get some of that Buy America money and NEVI money. But in all seriousness, what John's talking about is, as we've talked a lot, is building out this charging infrastructure. There's a lot of non-sexy stuff, which is the behind the scenes, switch gears, transformers, and things that are need to actually enable this sort of massive power infrastructure. And some of this stuff is a year or more out. And so one of my predictions, Brian, is, well, we've got this first year of all this funding from that National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program going to the states. We're actually going to probably see very few charging stations, those locations open up. In fact, we haven't even had a single vendor selected yet. Only one state has actually issued an RFP, Ohio. So, we're actually nowhere even close in just getting this process started, let alone sort of the equipment delays.
All right, Loren, it's your turn.
All right, my turn. So my prediction is that 2023 is, as I inferred earlier, is the year of fleet electrification, and there really, I see, sort of, Brian, four reasons for that. One is that historically there just haven't been very many commercial electric vehicles available. And now, whether it's semi-trucks, whether it's passenger vehicles, whether it's trucks like the F-150, whether it's the GM BrightDrop or Ford E-Transit, there is just a flurry of electric commercial grade vehicles coming to market. So the first thing is sort of, when you think about sort of the chicken and the egg, we actually have starting to have a supply of vehicles, which just wasn't there before. Secondly, Brian, is fleet managers are really waking up to total cost of ownership and how it can be lower with EVs. And fleet managers live in Excel spreadsheets and TCO, and so this is huge. And then finally, sort of quick points is that fleet electrification is sort of the easiest area for leadership and executives to tout to shareholders and the public that they're on board with their ESG, so those environmental of goals and stuff, and it's very visible. You get headlines. PepsiCo got massive headlines just for buying 2 Tesla semis, right? And so and lastly there's just the government incentives, right? There's just some really large commercial vehicle incentives available now. So yeah.
Well, to your point, where my daughter works. She works for Lightening eMotors here in Colorado. And Lightning eMotors, what they do is they basically retrofit fleet type vehicles, like utility vehicles, ambulatory, and so forth. And it's not free money, but you've got municipalities, you've got governments saying these 10 vehicles need to be electrified. So, and their business is booming. The other thing I think was really interesting, just a fascinating story, is BrightDrop. And BrightDrop is owned by GM. What's fascinating about their story is, from concept to first delivery of a vehicle was 18 months. So they sketched it out. This is what we're going to do. And they delivered their first FedEx vehicle in an 18-month period. And there's a lot of ways how they did that, but they were able to kind of cobble together sort of the modules like Lego bricks and build a vehicle, not be so much focused on the cockpit I can't say cockpit experience that we like in our Teslas and kind of consumer. This is a delivery truck. It's a last mile delivery truck. All right. Well, I talked a little bit about China. I'm going to talk a little bit about China again. This is my prediction. BYD, by some accounts, is already overtaken Tesla, at least in the China market. But globally, the numbers kind of keep fluctuating back and forth. But if you just follow the money, that's why I'm bullish. I mean, Warren Buffett has invested $230 million in BYD. But what I think is really interesting is they bought, what was it, like 8, I have it on the slide, 8 auto transport ships. I don't know of any other company that's done that, or automotive. So they have big plans for export. The other thing is their battery technology is turning heads. It's unique in some respects, the form factor, and their most recent technology they put out has you can get to about 50% of charge within 10 minutes. And the overall cost of the vehicle is around $40,000. So now you're in that, I think the sweet spot for the US market of mass adoption is you're now very comparable, if not even cheaper, to your point of cost of ownership than a gas-driven vehicle.
Yeah, and Brian, one quick point before we move on is that I think the other thing we're seeing is in 2023 from a global perspective is 2023 is sort of the year of the Chinese automakers infiltrating Europe. I mean, several of them are already there, NIO and stuff like that, but it's seeming like that they're all making a big push to because the domestic market is slowing because of the economy and things like that, and so they're going to Europe, which then probably portends that 2 or 3 years from now we might start seeing the China automakers come to the U.S. So remains to be seen, but we're going to be second. So Brian, I know you're going to start looking at the chat and stuff, and so yeah, if you've got questions or your own comments, go ahead and drop those into the chat. But as we mentioned in the survey we did, we actually had a other option, and so Brian and I went through and sort of pulled out kind of what were sort of the common comments, if you will, beyond those sort of primary response options we provided. And one of them, several of you said that you saw battery technology breakthrough or great improvements in batteries in 2023. And it's interesting because, every day, Brian, there's some university or some company saying they have, I just saw one yesterday, some company saying, you can be able to charge your EV in like 5 minutes and that type of thing. And yet we're not seeing these things come to market, right? And many of them, like solid state batteries, maybe 5 to 7 years out. And there's companies like One that are, have their sort of two battery pack concept, right? One short range, one long range in one and stuff. So I don't know. I guess I'm less bullish on that we're going to see any major breakthroughs in this coming year, but there's definitely incremental improvements that we're seeing every year. Improvement in energy density and changes in chemistry, battery chemistry, that's either reducing cost or increasing density. We talked, I don't think I'm going to go into this one in any detail because I already covered kind of the thoughts on vehicle to home. But definitely we're going to see more EVs coming to market that have that bi-directional capability, even if it's just what's called vehicle to load, that ability just to sort of plug in and charge your your camping stove or your boom box or mini fridge at a tailgate football game and that type of thing. And then the last thing is the IRA, the clean vehicle credit, everybody had a lot of hope for, and the reality is we don't know yet actually what the vehicles are going to qualify. We know only about a dozen. There's only about 12 to 15 vehicles that will qualify from a MSRP and made in the US capability. What is unclear is how many actually will qualify for the battery requirements. And so the reality is probably 0 vehicles for the next couple of years will qualify for the full 7,500. And maybe a half a dozen to 10 might qualify for the 3,750 to the half. So I think there's a bit of disappointment there, and and still a lot of confusion in that area.
All right, so with the 4 minutes remaining, so we got time for, I think, 2 comments. One is, and there was actually comment on the comment, is wireless charging being a catalyst for vehicle, I believe what they're saying is vehicle to home. The convenience factor. I don't have to, I can just roll into my garage and there it goes.
Yeah, and
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I can just comment on that. The problem. I'm a big fan of the future of wireless. The problem in the consumer sector is a chicken and the egg, right? There's only two vehicles on the planet, and neither of them are sold in the U.S. that come with the capability to charge wirelessly. So it's kind of an aftermarket thing right now. The commercial market is going to adopt it in a big way.
The next comment is perfect because this may actually be our next episode. And by the way, we're going to take a little bit of a break with the episodes, but we're coming back. Is solid state batteries, and where are we? And I will comment real quick on that. It always seems like solid state batteries are 5 years away every year. Is is next year, are we going to be there? What do you think, Loren?
I mean, Toyota seems to be the most aggressive on the timing, and we might they may start testing in the next year or two and stuff. But one of our future guests that I've spoken to in the past, has still been talking about about 5 years out and stuff. So yeah, I think we're still several years away from seeing solid state batteries in any vehicle that you and I could buy.
Right. All right, let me close this out for everybody. If you could just hang on for just a few more minutes. All of those clips you saw are full hour sessions. You can download them. It's for free. You can use this QRC or reach out to either Loren or I, and you certainly can take a look at the full feed. And I think they're all still very relevant. And I want to talk a little bit about what this is all about, and I think is really exciting. We touched upon, and Loren had asked, why is it the electronics are failing? And this is something that me personally in my industry is what we're focused on. And there's a number of different reasons. We are, the old saying, we're building the plane while we're flying it. Well, maybe we should say that we're building the EV while we're driving it. And the reality is that a lot of the specifications on how things are designed, how things are tested from a manufacturing standpoint, were developed way over 10 years ago. We didn't have any EVs on the road 10 years ago. We maybe had a few Teslas. It was just coming to market. So fast forward to today, the industry hasn't kept up. So literally things are being built to standards that are antiquated. And if you think about it, from an electronic standpoint, everything is having to run a lot longer. I mean, EVs are always on. They're charging, they're at home. They're having to run a lot harder, I should say, higher voltages. And all that stuff gets hot. You're adding heat to these printed circuit boards. So for that reason, and reasons also that, specifications are kind of having to catch up, the industry is struggling to keep up with the e-mobility revolution. And what we're doing in January is we're bringing together all of the suppliers, and Loren and I are actually part of this session as well. So you're going to have the OEMs, the actual car manufacturers like Rivian. You're going to have the tier ones. Those are those traditional automotive suppliers like Bosch, and you're actually going to have tier twos, which are kind of the up and coming in automotive, that have been building consumer electronics for a long time, but have never built for automotive, which that in itself is also a challenge because you don't have the experience. So please, if you're interested in joining, it is in San Diego in January. And last but not least, if you're interested in the tech, and that's how all this stuff is built from the electronic standpoint, we had a similar kind of webinar series this year, and everything is for free download. You can go and use this QRC, and we will be doing more next year. And I think that's a wrap. We ran 1 minute over. I want to say happy holidays to everybody. And if you've got ideas you'd like to see us talk about next year, by all means, reach out. Loren and I are easily found on LinkedIn. Send us an email. If you being registered for this, we have your email. If you opted out, I won't bug you. But if you opted in, please reach out to us. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.